We're going to start the Faith in Action Racial Equity Network workshop in about 2 minutes. We have consciously tried to leave about half the time for conversation and questions. So as we're working through the first part, if you could be thinking about things you might want to bring into the room, that would be great. Can I call Franklin and Karen up here, please? So we're going to start with a little video clip, and then I'll give a little context for the rest of the time that we'll be spending together.
Sacred Ground is a video dialogue series on race and faith. Through the stories of our culture, the stories of our sojourn here in America, the stories of race, both the joys and the sorrows, by listening to those stories and hearing them, then telling our own stories together, and then looking possibly at the stories of our very faith. Somehow from the travail and the reality of all of those stories may emerge hope for a new day. I'm reminded that in the 3rd chapter of Exodus in the Hebrew scriptures, Moses climbed up Mount Sinai. He was trying to discern whether he should go back to Egypt to help to free the Hebrew slaves. He climbed up on the mountain and saw a burning bush. And in the vision of this burning bush, he heard the voice speak to him, Moses, Moses, take off the shoes from your feet, for the ground on which you are standing is holy ground, sacred ground. And then the voice from the bush said, I am the God of your ancestors, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. A friend of mine many years ago preached on that text. And he said the reason that Moses was summoned to take off the shoes from his feet because the ground on which he was standing was holy ground. Not because the dirt was holy, but because God was about to tell his story. Whenever someone tells their story, you are standing on holy ground. Sacred ground is a time, an opportunity to hear the story of our past with regard to race, to hear our stories of our past, and then to write a new story for a new future with plenty of good room for all of God's children. God love you. God bless you. May God hold us all in his almighty hands of love.
Good afternoon. I'm making music. Amen. I'm Karen Brow. I serve as a pastor at Luther Place Church in Washington, D.C., and I co-chair the Metro DC Racial Equity Team with the Reverend Franklin Morales. And we're just so glad that you're spending time today with a panel of people who will talk about their experience of sharing their stories of faith and how we are at a time in our Lutheran Church where we have heard from the bishop that it is a time where we have to be attentive to the stories and the stories that exclude and the stories that are able to include all of God's children in an understanding of what God's grace is. And if Bishop Curry would go on, he's wonderful to talk about building the beloved community. And I think that's also a place for us to figure out together, what is that in these days and how is it manifest in the congregations we're part of or the congregations that we serve. The Racial Equity Team for the Synod has been around since 2015. And it really was brought forth by when Freddie Gray ended up dying in police custody in Baltimore, Maryland. And there was uprisings happening then, and Bishop Graham organized clergy together to talk about it. And because like we all have to be humble in this work around race, there was no real answer as what to do. And by the movement of the Holy Spirit, by the assembly, which was just before, which was set just after the massacre of 9 people at Mother Emanuel AME Church by Dylan Roof. Sort of there was a convening of the Racial Equity Team coming together, that happening, and the understanding that we're actually not in business as usual. And so this is a continuation of the work, and Reverend Franklin will tell you a little bit more.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Franklin Morales. I am the Associate Pastor at St. Luke Lutheran Church in Silver Spring, Maryland, and the lead pastor for La Sagrada Familia Ministry here in Langley Park. So that's an honor to be with you all in this moment and to share a little bit what we do in our racial equity team. But just let me share a little bit what it does mean for me, being in the racial equity team. For me, it has been an experience to look through the history, at least from this country. As you know, I'm not from the States, I'm from Venezuela. But one of the things that struck me the most when I came to the Lutheran Church after being a Catholic priest for 4 years was this division that we experienced through the history, along the history in the States, because of racism, because of many things that divide us, because our color skins, our status in the society, and many things are the places that we came from. So being in the racial equity team helped open to me a window to start healing and restoring the society, at least here in this moment, and our church. So it's an opportunity to every one of us to relook our history, to see what has been done in a wrong way, and reveal that history, and restore and reform that history by the Holy Spirit, to feel healed, to feel restored, and to be sent forth for everyone. As Lutherans, our baptism, we commit to strive for justice and equity and peace. And I think we are living in a moment that we are called to do so with more awareness and with love and mercy. And just to finish, you know, I have been realizing how grace happens to every one of us. But sometimes we are just aware about how grace happens to me, but not how grace happens to others. Because when grace happens to others, it's hard to understand. But when it happens to me, it's just beautiful. But we cannot understand when it happens to others. So I think the racial equity team is an opportunity to see how that grace of God happens to every one of us, include every one of us, and make us possible and able to build God's kingdom here and now. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Shannon Spence. I'm a member of Peace Lutheran in Alexandria, and I'm a layperson. I just want to give a little context for today. We're going to try to keep as much time as we can at the end for conversation and sharing and questions. And really today is about relationship and connection and walking with each of you on your journey around this issue in your congregations. And what we're going to try to do is share a couple of perspectives from people who have done some racial justice, racial equity work inside their congregations, one from a layperson's perspective and one from a clergy perspective, really with the perspective that it's going to be different for each of you. This work is huge. Obviously, it is deep, it is long, it has a long and deep history. And there's no right or wrong way to do this within your congregation. So as I said, we're gonna have a couple of short sharings up here, one other video. Just a couple of logistics things. Heather, if you wouldn't mind raising your hand, is going around with a sign-up sheet. One of the main, or one of the key objectives of this workshop and the one that we had yesterday is to keep in touch with you. There are probably congregations out there that have maybe one or two people who are searching and discerning how to do this work in their space. And we want to be a resource to you. We want us to all be resources to each other in wherever the place is that you are in your work. So there's a sign-in sheet so that we can keep in touch with you. And we sort of named that the Faith in Action Racial Equity Network. So there's a sign-in sheet if you could please sign up if you want to stay in touch. The second piece of that sign-in sheet is whether or not you'd be interested in learning more or participating in the Sacred Ground training, which you've heard mentioned a lot of times over the last day or so. This is and it will be talked about more later in this session. So that's whether or not you'd like to be involved. That's also on that spreadsheet. We also, at one point, maybe during the question and answer period, we're going to get some more detailed information from the Synod's consultant who is doing the survey about their listening sessions here at the Assembly and how you can participate in the listening sessions in the survey, and to why it's really important to encourage our congregations to robustly address that survey. So that information will come in a few minutes. Okay, let me figure out what's next. So what I'm going to be sharing a perspective as someone a layperson in a congregation, and what this work, racial justice work, has been like in a congregation. This is a sample, right? And in the conversations I've had across the Synod and today at this assembly, it sort of bears out what my sense was, which is that it's different in every congregation, right? We have some congregations that are further along in this journey and some that are still in a nascent stage. Some where we have the energy coming from the lay people, and some where the energy is coming from the pulpit. And I think that it's about really discerning where you're at. At Peace, and I have been only at Peace, I think 4 or 5 years. And I'll say it's my first Lutheran church. I was an Episcopalian before I came to Peace. And I joined Peace when I moved down to Virginia for work. Now, Peace had been doing some racial justice work before before I got there. So I'm taking other people's words for that. So that's not first person narrative. There was a couple of book studies, I think in 2016 around that time. But a small group of people, and they were lay people in our church, during coffee hour, were talking about racial justice, and this was in 2018, 2019. You know, that we, you know, how could we do this work for justice inside our church? You know, should we do another book study? Should we bring in videos? Should we have a historical tour of, you know, Alexandria around, you know, Black history in that space? And one of the folks, and again, it was 2 or 3 people that would just sort of talk over a period of months. We found a curriculum called Troubling the Waters, if anyone has heard of that or is familiar with that. And we said, oh, wow, this is great. And that curriculum really addresses, again, white privilege, working for racial justice, but inside a church context, inside the context of being a Christian. And it takes place over a number of months. And so we went to our council and you know, went to our pastor and discussed with her. Then the council said that they thought that this was a good thing for us to do. So we organized our first cohort. It was about 10 people. I was one of the co-leaders, and we started in December of 2019. So that's a few months before COVID and before George Floyd's murder. So we were into the curriculum. When COVID hit, I was pretty sure that this was gonna fall apart, honestly, because as you can remember, in those first few weeks, it was very scary and people were very preoccupied. But what was amazing, and I had found in every time I've ever done this kind of training, is the world is what the world is, which means that whatever is happening, racism is a key part of it. And as you recall, in the, you know, there were discussions around how the most vulnerable people in our society were the Black and brown and poor people who had to work and could not, you know, quarantine, et cetera, et cetera. And I took the hand off the wheel in terms of being a facilitator, and the group itself said, this is important stuff. This is living out right in front of us. History is living out right in front of us every day. And we have to keep doing this. And so while we were transitioning to Zoom and homeschooling and all the rest that we were dealing with, we continued to meet. And, you know, we completed that first cohort. There was enough. By the way, there are a lot of resources that we have. One of them is that at the end of that Troubling the Waters, you do a service for the congregation. And so this group that had been studying racial justice and white privilege in our history, and I'll say that entire cohort was all white, we created a racial justice service, music and readings, and we read the names of Black and brown people killed by police intermittently through the service. And it was very, very, very powerful. And again, I give kudos to my church and my pastor for stepping into that space, which is really not always easy. Yeah. We did a second cohort. And again, I think it started right before George Floyd's murder. And so the curriculum got completely upended by history, which is just fine, because it accelerates any learning that anyone is doing. All you got to do is read the paper and you can accelerate your learning. We did a second cohort. Since that time, just because I don't want to take more than my fair share of this time, you know, we have organized a racial justice team at our church. We meet monthly. We've had a number of activities. Speakers have come in, book studies. We did an Indigenous Peoples celebration liturgy this last fall. We have a Black Lives Matter mural on our property, and we have used that as a way to bring in the artists and the youth in our congregation, as well as we have had a couple of different activities around it to bring in to solicit conversation within people in our congregation who are not 100% on board with that, right? And to really solicit and to deepen that. We have had hard discussions. We have had people come into our congregation because of the anti-racist work we're doing, and we have had people leave, and we have had money leave. And, you know, my pastor gave me permission to say that it's a hard thing. It's been a challenging journey for us on that regard, especially because we also lost some of our finances during COVID. But she reminds herself that, you know who's leaving, but you don't know who's going to be walking in the door next Sunday. The other thing I just wanted to point out, just in closing, is that this was led by lay people in the church. And so, and I told my pastor, I said, it's hard for me to say this without sounding self-serving. She says, tell them I gave you permission. Okay. But I wanted to point that out because I think we are the leaders. And I think that we don't have to wait and can't wait, frankly, for the person who stands up in front of us every Sunday to lead. If it's something that we think is important, you know, somebody described the Lutheran Church to me, you know, it's a dotted line relationship, right? The folks nobody, you know, our bishop can't tell us what to do. She can recommend and provide guidelines, right? Because this church is about the body of Christ and us being in the pews. And I think we need to look at ourselves as leaders. And that is what this network is really about. We want to help you in that journey, both lay and pastors. So what's next? All right.
I am Pastor Carrie Parsons, and in light of this doesn't look the same in all congregations, there wasn't a lay member who kept saying in my congregation, we got to talk about racial issues. It came from me. And I probably about the same time as it started coming from the Synod with Freddie Gray and the situation in Baltimore happening, I began to have my eyes opened about how much racial injustice was out there in the world, and it began to sort of subtly sneak it into some preaching. We have a strong adult forum in our congregation. And so I began, you know, each year saying, I'm going to do something about race in the context of adult forum. And I want to share a little bit about things I learned, because at the beginning I felt like, who am I, a white woman, to do this? Shouldn't this be coming from the minority population? And over time, I have come to learn that anti-racism is white people's work. And I think that was an important insight that I needed to have. And then the more I have learned, the more I realize, you know, how totally unfair to ask the people who we have been putting down by our systems to stand up and, you know, lead the change. Like, now I get it, but it's a process. And it has been really a process with me. For me, the issue just became glaringly obvious with the murder of Philando Castile. I grew up outside of Minneapolis, and that story made me realize that this racism was rampant in the community in which I grew up, and I was completely oblivious to it. It was also deeply personal to me because my younger brother is a white police officer outside of Minneapolis. And he is not, he is working hard to do this work correctly, and to live and learn into it. But that was just like, wow, this is really close to my heart. And then of course was compounded with George Floyd. But for me, recognizing that I grew up in a community that, I thought there wasn't a lot of conflict, and I was so oblivious. And once again, over and over and over again, as I have learned and led studies and learned more, I just feel like my eyes are opened and opened and opened again and again and again. Then I got involved in the Sacred Ground. When the Synod offered it, I said, I need to do this. And I took part in it the first time, did the facilitator training, and over the past year, led this this amazing group of people who are leading this worship of this workshop through the Sacred Ground curriculum. And at first, I have to say, the idea of a 12-session anything was incredibly daunting. But walking this through this with this small group of people, our conversations deepened and grew in amazing ways, and it did take that time and that willingness to be vulnerable with one another and to admit, how much we didn't know, how much we needed to learn, and it's been really valuable. I have not felt like I had people to call into a racial equity team in my congregation until just in the last month. I have begun introducing the Sacred Ground curriculum there. And all of a sudden now there is movement, and I am grateful for all of the partnerships and the pooling of resources, because we don't know how to do this work. I don't know how to do this work. And we also don't have to do it alone. We can learn from one another.
So next we're going to have sharing from Don, who participated in Sacred Ground.
Well, I was very fortunate because it was a great group. And I'll admit firstly that I waited until the third email said, you should do this. And then I waited till the third session to say, wow, this really is different. And I didn't know anything about this. And it's a lot of information that you might have assumed you knew, but you didn't. And so I looked at the different principles that were involved, and the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and which is the Torah and the Jewish faith, give us the 10 Commandments, and that's how we strive to live. But most people don't know the 11th commandment, and that's given by Jesus in John, where he said, "A new commandment I give to you, just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. And by this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you have loved one another." And then another principle that I found was, and $5, anybody knows who this is, just yell it out. And
Hold me to it.
A person is a person through other persons. None of us comes into the world fully formed. We would not know how to think or walk or speak or behave as human beings unless we learned it from other human beings. We need other human beings in order to be human. I am because other people are. Yeah, it made $5. Desmond Tutu, Nobel Prize winner. So we all have in our life stories that have brought us to where we are at this moment, this very moment right here in this room. It is in the sharing of our life stories that we see the human in each other and relate at the empathic level of love to one another instead of judgmental. My story's pretty different probably than most of yours. I grew up in a real small town in North Dakota, 10,000 people. There were no Black people in my town. I mean, anywhere. I don't have a photographic memory, but I remember exactly the day when my father and I were in the workshop and arranging our tools, and he looked at me and he said, "I hate Black people." And I went, "What?" And then began a 2-hour heated discussion with a 10-year-old and his father about that's not right. And we never did resolve that. He's gone now, but we never did resolve that issue. But we both had different stance. Sacred Ground was, after about the third session, I couldn't wait until we met again. And we met at 8 o'clock at night. And a lot of times we didn't finish till after 10. So, and all the people in our group were very dedicated, very enthusiastic, and brought all kinds of different bents, if you will, on the subject. So you've already heard that it's 12 sessions. And if you want to get an idea of what it is, you can go out on YouTube and look at Sacred Ground. It's not exactly the same as what we did, but it gives you an idea of what Sacred Ground might be. To me, it was an eye-opening and heart-opening glimpse into the way we become what we are today, on a mission to get church-wide dedication to humility, faith, and brotherhood with one another. There are you heard, I think today, there are new cohorts starting now, and there will be others in the fall, and we've received so many people requesting to be included that I'm sure there'll be more after that. So get in early. I'd like to thank some people. I thought about our team. It was a great team. We really enjoyed it. From Shannon, I admired her confidence. From Heather, her persistence. From Andreas, his friendliness. From Laura, her thoughtfulness, I'm sorry. Sorry, Laura. Ken Taylor, very talented guy. I didn't realize that he had so many hidden talents. And then, of course, Carrie, for her dedication to us as a team. And in the end of our journey, when you leave this world, the only thing you take with you are the things you have packed into your heart. Thank you.
We're going to share. That's not right. We're going to share one more clip from Sacred Ground to give you a little bit of a feel. Again, I know you've heard a lot about it. It's a video-based 12-session training. There is some reading, but the videos that have been selected are really powerful. It was developed by the Episcopal Church, so that's why we were hearing Bishop Curry, and you'll hear more here. But it's been we borrowed anyway. Yeah, purchased. Yes, and then we the racial equity team actually assembled 2 sessions at the end to sort of link it into the ELCA and the Lutheran denomination. So with that.
This is tortured holy ground. People, human beings were tortured here, were held in bondage here. They were carted off from here like they were cattle. They wept They slept in their own excrement. The beautiful sound of the ocean was a sound of terror. They had never seen it or heard it before. And they were going somewhere they didn't even know. I was really thinking of it as a kind of homecoming for me as an African American, knowing that we were going to be coming to the places of slaves, enslavement, and embarkation, and that terrible journey through the Middle Passage to the Americas. Knowing that was a way of returning sort of to the roots of who I am. W.B. Du Bois, in his book, The Souls of Black Folk, once spoke of being Black in America as two warring souls in one dogged body. And the truth is, I've lived a life of two souls in one body, African and American, Black and Episcopalian. And I've lived with that reality since I was a child. All you have to do is go into your family history and you will see paradoxes galore in all of our families. And the same is true for me, even as an African-American man, as the presiding bishop of the Episcopal Church, a church that did participate and very often blessed some of the horrors that happened here. It was a hell on earth. And we were in a chapel above the dungeon where people were being tortured. But at one point, it was an Anglican chapel. Prayers from the 1662 prayer book were prayed while people were being damned below. That is a horrible paradox to have to live. And yet, on the other hand, those who survived lived long enough for children to be born from them and for generations to come from them. And what they endured, they did not endure in vain. And so somehow standing here in this place is somewhere between heaven and hell. And for me, it is a place of real recommitment. My hope is that this journey will help us to reclaim and reface a common history that we have, a painful past, not for the sake of guilt, but for the sake of all of us, black, white, red, yellow, and brown, finding ways to face our past and then to turn in a new direction and creating the future. This may be a moment when the churches may lead the society to find another way. The church blessed this once, but we must never bless any of the mutated, cancerous forms of hatred ever again. We must bless the world by a love that is meant for all and a love that will never be stopped. We follow Jesus, who had to endure the paradox of hatred in the midst of love, and he did it. We can do it as the Episcopal Church. We can do it as Americans. That's the message for me from here.
Now that I love you, there's no turning back. Now that I love you, there's no turning back.
So we have about 25 minutes for conversation. I know we have brothers and sisters on Zoom. So if there are any questions or comments, I believe they'll be put up on the screen from them. And for any of the folks on Zoom, if they would like to virtually sign up, I believe that I've given permission for my email to go to them so that we can get their information as well. Okay, great. So would anybody like to start? We got 3 mics. Okay, great.
I don't question the necessity of this work, but I'm challenged by something that was said to me, that this is sometimes more hurtful for the people that I'm trying to love than it is helpful. That is, by talking about racial differences, and I'm in a congregation that has Black members, I'm making them something less than human. I'm making them a Black person, and I'm talking about their problems. And I find that challenging. The same thing happened to me years ago when I tried to be a supporter of women's rights, and I was told to get out because I didn't understand. And so I'm asking you, or not asking, I guess I'm saying, this is my concern, is that how can I be loving and open in talking about a problem that I know causes some people, they don't want to talk about it. It's hurtful to them even to be discussing it.
One of the things I would say about the materials in this curriculum especially is it isn't framed in a, it's more about looking at the ways that what white supremacy did to others, as opposed to look at the suffering of others. Does that make sense? It changes the frame a bit to be looking at the church's complicity, those in power's complicity in making these things happen. Historically, yeah, and today.
Angie Shannon, pastor of All Saints Lutheran Church in Bowie, Maryland. For some years, I've been ordained 25 years, and for 15 of those years, I worked with women of the ELCA as an anti-racism educator. I am going to share some words to speak to that from Reverend Tanya Denise Anderson, who is the racial justice person for the Presbyterian Church USA. So she says it's so much better than I, so I'm going to share this with you. By choice, I have decided to stand back and fall back because this is white folk work. It is.
Amen.
And while I will always be supportive, let me just share this with you. For white and white adjacent folks who fairly recently came into the work of anti-racism, a few things to keep in mind. You're late. Glad to see you, but you're late. If your Uber or Lyft were as late as you are, you would expect a refund and an apology from the CEO. Again, great that you're here. Set a spell, kick off your shoes, but know that your lateness isn't a front. Secondly, because you're late, and even if you're not, expect a lukewarm welcome from the community you now seek to walk alongside. Why? Because we're tired. At this point, you're the kid we got assigned for a group project, but because you never showed up for the session, we had to pull your weight. You are the Paul crew in the longest yard when he set out most of the second half and then rejoined the game and tried to make nice with the O-line after the team had taken After the team, after the team had taken a beating, while you sat, we got sacked. We are battered, so expect us not to have the energy or interest in making it easy and accessible for you. Third point, because we are battered, it would be best for you to seek out folks who have the energy to do the hand-holding you may need right now. Preferably, that person would be another white person with whom you observe doing the work. Ask them about the books and articles to read. Perhaps they can coach you through some faithful next steps, sacred grounds. Faithful next steps. Many POC may be willing to do that right now as well, but don't presume we can make that space. Remember, we are hurting, and we often find that when we're in pain is precisely the time white folks want to engage us. There is a better way. Another bullet point. If you are truly committed to the work, also commit to being uncomfortable, because it will be uncomfortable. Navigating white supremacy sure isn't easy for us, so expect it not to be easy for you when you find yourself on its bad side. Slaying dragons takes work, and these systems won't magically disappear because you're here now. But again, the people with the least amount of responsibility for making you feel good in the midst of this is us. And finally, all messes take longer to clean up than they do to make. This mess is hundreds of years old and will take an unknown number of years to make it right. If you are not setting in for generational change, if you are not learning so you can teach, if you're not working for a world that you may not live long enough to enjoy, you will do more damage than good. Will your descendants look back on your life and say you were on the right side of history? Will they be able to say you were brave enough to shape the future, even if it cost you your present? That's the question you must ask yourself. Can you work to save the world without being the hero? Amen.
Amen. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Reverend Tanya Denise Anderson, and she's back in the area now. Yay! A good colleague and sorority sister of mine. So yeah, that's kind of where this Black-bodied woman is. Glad you're here, but you're late. And let's do the work of substantive change.
And it is white people's work to do. We have to dismantle, dismantle an unjust system. Is there somebody online?
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, I'm Melody Mobley from Faith Lutheran in Arlington. I asked for and was given a slot from the Methodist Church and went through the Sacred Ground training. I'm 64 years old. That is the best training I've had in my life. I agree that it's uncomfortable for all participants, Black, red, or white, because we had some training on Native Americans. That's why I included the red. But for me, it is so wonderful that finally there is an acknowledgement of the wrongs that were done. And yes, as a Black woman, I'm aware of that. The other people on my team or in the session, or I guess we call it a cohort, were white ministers. And I found that my very presence, being able to share current day examples of racism that were happening to me personally, that was very valuable in helping their understandings. And we were uncomfortable together. I never felt like it was a waste of time or too late or any of that. Thank you for letting me comment.
Thank you. And I want to thank the person for asking the question. And I want to just, that we've been responding to. I think also I just want to say that as white folks being late and doing this work, you're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes. I've made so many, I can't even count. And they're not, as we've said, it's not comfortable. And there's a lot of shame involved in that. But that's part of the learning and part of the process. It's part of the growing. And I think that sometimes we get paralyzed because we don't know where to start and we don't want to hurt any feelings and we don't want to make mistakes. And it seems so big. And I think we just need to accept we're going to make mistakes. You make the best decision you can at the moment and know that it might not be right. And that's okay. That's okay.
I think it's also important to approach the work with a sense of humility and that I am going to mess this up and I don't know what I'm doing, but I feel compelled to keep trying. So there was a hand up. Come.
Good afternoon. Toof Simon from Community Lutheran Church in Sterling, Virginia. So I signed up for the Sacred Ground, and I don't know when is the next time, the next session. Question that I have is, did you use this training or the materials that you read or listened to engage with your, the community around you? Could be, African American, Latino, or any other, diverse community. Was that helpful to engage with them? And if it was, can you give some example on how you used the materials to engage with, community around you?
So is Tom in the room? No. So I am not the organizer of all of the cohorts of Sacred Ground, so I couldn't specifically answer that question. But I will say that I think that the experience and knowledge gained by going through the Sacred Ground curriculum lays fertile, I mean, not to use, but the lays fertile ground for the work inside the congregations to then, because what happens very early in a training like this for white folks, I have found, is they become aware of things and then they want to fix it. They want to do something, right? They want to do something, which is good. But as they're going through the learning process that other people have said this, and it is a lifelong learning process. They take that knowledge into the congregations. And I think that's part of why we wanted to lay the groundwork with the network, because it's going to be different in each congregation. And some congregations, they are using their newfound perspective to do the work out in the community, but I don't think it's an immediate link of the curriculum to the community. My best understanding, unless anybody else has anything else on that.
It certainly does provide you with a breadth of historical knowledge, far beyond the usual high school curriculum, with which to view different issues in community.
Has anybody else here done any work within their congregations that they'd like to share as an example? I gave one example of a congregation. Pastor Carey gave another. Does anyone want to share the journey, even if it hasn't started and it's still an idea about what you're thinking about in your congregation?
Yeah, I can give an anecdote. My minister, I'm from King of Kings in Fairfax. My minister is here at the conference and we were sitting next to each other. And I turned to her and she turned to me and we both said, I just took Sacred Ground. I said, you did? She goes, yeah. She said, I didn't know you were taking it either. So, and we've decided we're going to take it to our church council and start with the council members and work down from there.
Somebody have their hands up?
Yeah.
Hi, Mary Ann Hahn, Advent in Arlington. Not an example of what we're doing in our congregation, but I had a question based on something that you mentioned. You said that this is curriculum that you were not introduced to in high school or in school. And that made me think the Sacred Ground curriculum and also the other one that you mentioned, I think Troubling the Waters, are those curricula appropriate for youth? Have there been any youth that have been in the cohorts so far? And if not, would that be a good idea? Shouldn't we push this down to that level and maybe make that a little bit more obvious that this is not taught in history courses in school?
Yes. I also have, this is probably a comment on my own deviant personality, but there's a part of me that when somebody tells me you can't do that makes me want to do it even more. And the fact that there are so many people trying to say you can't teach this in school and we have to ban these books and be deviant in the church and teach this history, and they can't mess with us because of the separation of church and state. So you have this, I'm a kind of sick, twisted person, I will admit it. But that, you know, we have this shelter sort of, and a way to, despite politically people saying, stop doing this, don't do this, you can't do this. We have an audience and we have a way to get this out, which is important. And it very much acknowledges that the church, sadly, tragically, terribly, has been a part of promulgating white supremacy and oppression, and to acknowledge that and to break those links is really important too. And you can do it by feeling like you're subverting people who sometimes drive me crazy.
Mike 3.
Carmelo Santos. I worship at Peace in Alexandria, and I work for the ELCA, and part of my job is to help the church articulate some of the theological foundations for combating white supremacy. And I want to say, first of all, thank you for doing this hard work, which is uncomfortable, but it's clearly transformational. And I thank you as a member of the church, as a Latino man, and as somebody serving in the office of the presiding bishop. Thank you for doing this work. I want to channel a little bit Cornel West. If you haven't seen Cornel West, you should look him up on YouTube. And it is. There are two sides to the coin. There's the side of the tragedy that we just saw in the video of the horrible things that our siblings of African descent had to go through. And that needs to be understood and seen. The other side of that coin is what an amazing group of people that went through all that and produced a bishop like that can now lead the church. What an amazing group of people. And so I think that it is important in this work for those of us that are from minoritized communities to remember our fabulousness, and that we are not, thank you, and that there's a lot that we have achieved historically as a community on our own, and that we have to share with the church, that there's stuff that we bring. We're not just a project. We're not something that is broken and needs to be fixed. The second thing is for the church, the leadership, our white siblings, to become curious about that fabulousness, about that beauty that is different, but it's beautiful, and that is a way through which God also wants to bless and has already been blessing the church. And how can the church receive it? So that is the first invitation, to have that curiosity for our own communities and for all other communities. The second invitation is, I think, the next step for this study process. And it was hinted at earlier, and is engaging in actual relationship and actual conversation with others. And I bring to you a challenge that was shared with me. And the challenge is that we begin to engage some of our historically Black churches, and that we engage in conversation, maybe invite the pastor for a coffee and think through, like, how can our people begin to interact together and get to learn each other and worship in different settings. Because when we take it to that level that is relational, then it gets real. And then the transformation is painful, it's hard, but it's more effective. But again, thank you for the work that you're doing. This is really inspiring.
Just one small plug along that. The racial equity team has developed something called commemorations, lamentation, celebration, and education. This is the last copy we have here, but if you sign up on the sign up sheet, I'll send you a PDF. And what this is not every day of the year, but probably 2/3 of the days of the year. These are lamentation, celebration, and education around African-American, Latino, Latina history, Asian Pacific, Indigenous. And the really target of this was exactly what Carmelo talked about. There is tremendous celebration here. I was the main researcher on this. And you feel like once you go through and do this research and learn this, that you are in the company of saints all the time, everywhere you go. Because what this really reinforced for me was how much beauty and beautiful history has been all the time and is all the time that I've never heard of and don't know anything about. And so this is, I really invite people to take this as sort of a starting point. I think we had a couple questions here, and I'd like to invite the person from Gold to come up to the mic over here, and then I think we might be out of time at that point.
I have a quick question, Maria from Emmanuel and Bethesda. Quick question and then a comment. The question is, can we open this up to and share this in with our congregations for those who would be interested in participating?
Sacred ground?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
The other thing I would say is that I would actually flip our last conversation around. Instead of us thinking about being deviant and with our kids and all, I think we have to listen to our kids. Amen. Because I think our kids have gone through and understand much more of what's going on than I did. And I think that we made advances in our church, if you want to call them advances, but greater understandings on environmental issues by involving our youth and having them lead the session and having the rest of us listen. And the toughest conversation I had was after the killing of George Floyd, with my kids sitting down with me and explaining, having grown up in Fargo-Moorhead. So I understand having my one Black friend in high school, the difference between being colorblind and then doing the work of anti-racism. And it was my kids who told me what I had to do. And I think the more we can get our youth into teaching us and their experiences now, I think the better off we're going to be.
Thank you.
Yes.
So I was just going to speak to the question of different things that the different congregations have done. So I have 3 on that. One is that 3 years ago when we were in this lectionary cycle, I preached a sermon. I included reference to Dr. King. And after that sermon, I was approached by 2 different individuals. One, I was approached by a young man of color who, actually he didn't approach me because he said to his mom, wow, I'm surprised to hear about Dr. King when it's not Black History Month. And his mom reported that to me. And then also I was approached by a maybe 70-year-old woman who confessed and really came to me kind of trying to unpack it. She said, I grew up being taught that Dr. King was a terrible person and I've always been confused. Wow. So out of those 2 comments, so in the Gospel of Luke, it lines up pretty nicely with Dr. King's collection of sermons, Strength to Love. And so for the summer, through the summer, maybe into the fall, each week I gave an assignment because, yeah, like Dr. King doesn't directly preach the Lucan lectionary, but he comes kind of close. So just for people's reference, Strength to Love might be a good preaching partner these upcoming months. So that's one. Another one is that our congregation, a few members, and I participated in an organization called Little Lights. Little Lights gives an 11-week curriculum on what they call Race Literacy 101. And that was a helpful, I think probably very similar to the curriculum that we're referencing. And then third, one of the most important things for me has been to be in a support group with people who are recently coming home from incarceration. And sadly, the racist structures that we live with means that that's largely a people of color group. And I've been part of groups that try to bring together people who are recently incarcerated and people who have never been incarcerated and don't know much about it. And again, sadly, that basically breaks down to people of color and white people. But in as much as it's a mutual support group, there's been a lot of fellowship and mutual strengthening of the saints for the sake of reconciliation. So just 3 possibilities there.
Thank you. Wonderful. I think the last thing, just about, yep, some information about the survey, and then I think we ran out of time, unfortunately.
Hello there. Thank you so much for the opportunity to come share with you all today. My name is Shauna Payne Gold. I go by she, her, hers pronouns. I'm the owner and founder of Gold Enterprises, which has been gratefully selected to help through the racial audit. And so we're really grateful that we're having the opportunity to do this work with you all. I am not the only person doing this work. I have a really well-equipped team of folks that are doing this work. Malika Clinkscales that comes to us with 20 years of executive coaching and diversity experience in Nashville, Tennessee. Also, Dr. Lisa Ingerfield, who is on the faculty at the University of Denver School of Social Work. Also, Dr. Andrea Rodriguez, a very recent doctoral graduate from Drexel University in organizational leadership. And then my co-conspirator back here, Dr. Nielsen, raising his hand there, Dr. Cody Nielsen, who is also helping me as ordained minister in this work as well. I'm really grateful to be with you all here today. And we want to really remind everyone that everyone under the sound of my voice should have gotten an email on June 9th that speaks to the racial equity audit. In that email, that provides you with several links that you will want to make sure that you take part in. First, the survey that we created. It is for everyone. Please be sure to complete that survey. As of my check just about 15 minutes ago, we had a little over 200 people that had completed the survey. So we want to keep that momentum going. Also, too, Dr. Nielsen and I have been here this weekend, but Dr. Nielsen will also be staying in the area over the next couple of days if your congregation is interested in having someone on site to facilitate listening sessions. Those locations are all across the DMV area, so please make sure that you go into that email and check out those locations. Tomorrow at 4, Christ Lutheran. Tomorrow at 7, St. Paul's, and then on Monday at 9:30, Advent Lutheran in Arlington, then Lutheran Church of the Redeemer in McLean, and then St. Matthew's at 7 p.m. in Woodbridge. So Dr. Nielsen and I have really worked hard to get to know you all, and we're really grateful to be a part of this entire process. And please let us know how we may continue to support you in your work. We're doing this work as a synod, but we also want to stand in relationship with you all, especially as you're working within your individual congregations. So thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks everybody for attending today. Really appreciate the participation. Is this yours? Is this your laptop?